This may look like a tiny little box. I mean, it is a tiny little box, but in this tiny little box is a gaming PC with a powerful Ryzen 7 processor, about a bunch of other stuff that I'll tell you about in a minute, all the I/O to do whatever you want, enough horsepower to play some pretty darn nice looking games at respectable settings, and the best part is that it's tiny and quiet. It's like a little PC gaming console, and it's got great performance and it's super cheap. What I'm trying to say is it's good, and I like it. Hi there, I'm TechDweeb, welcome. Thanks for clicking on the video today. The world of mini PCs is becoming a crowded space, just like the world of big PCs, or laptops, or phones, or retro handhelds, or RGB smart toilets. I guess tech in general is just becoming crowded. We all want the latest and greatest gadgets at rock bottom prices, and because of that, the big evil machines that churn these things out to placate the masses while they quietly enslave us have been working overtime lately. So let's not let their work be in vain, and let's see what this little thing can do. This is the Trigkey S, and the S stands for speed, because this is part of Trigkey's High Performance S series. And not only that, it's 5th generation. This was given to me by my good friends over at Shenzhen AZW Technology Co. Limited, across the pond in China. However, you can get this on Amazon right now for less than $300. I'll include a link to this thing in the description below if you want to pick one up. The specs alone make it seem like a pretty freaking amazing deal, but is it actually any good? Well, we'll never find out if we don't open the box, so let's do that. The box itself is pretty small, and inside the box we get a word book, a book of words. Oh good, another HDMI cord. I think I only have 800 of these left. And this is a metal bracket, so you can mount it on the back of a monitor or a TV. And another very short HDMI cord, which I assume is for if you do the monitor mount. And here's our power brick. This is a 65-watt power brick. And onto the mini PC itself. First impressions are that it's freaking tiny. It has some I/O, which we'll talk about in a bit, but first I actually want to get right into the guts of this thing. And yeah, check it out. We have dual channel RAM, 2 8GB sticks, and there's our NVMe SSD. That's good. Oh, and I didn't mention it, but we also have space for a 2.5-inch drive, so you can upgrade this with a SATA laptop drive or SSD on the cheap if you need to. As for the specs, well, this is where things get interesting. This little guy is less than $300, and for that, you get a Ryzen 7 5800H processor, which is an 8-core 16-thread processor with a max boost of 4.4 GHz. And we also get 16 GB of DDR4 RAM, clocked at 3200 MHz. And 512 GB of NVMe internal storage. We also get Wi-Fi 6, Gigabit Ethernet, and enough I/O to spank a giraffe. A pair of 3.2 USB-A holes on the front and a 3.2 USB-C hole, which does support video out, along with a headphone hole. And around back, we have an Ethernet hole, 2 more USB-A holes, and a DisplayPort hole, and an HDMI hole, and a DC power hole for our 65-watt power connection. And well, yeah, that's about it as far as the physical stuff goes. So I guess you want to see how it works, do ya? Do ya? Well, calm down. We'll get to that, but first I want to remind you that losing your temper won't get you very far in life. But you know what will get you very far in life? Subscribing to TechDweeb. The Windows install on this thing is basic as heck. It has a normal, no-fuss Windows 11 install with no bloatware, other than the regular Microsoft bloatware, of course. I went ahead and installed Steam, MSI Afterburner, and a whole lot of games. But before we get to that, I wanted to check out how this processor would do on its own. I ran Cinebench R23 and I got a multi-core score of 9,784. That's better than a desktop Ryzen 5 3600X in a mini PC that costs under $300. So yeah, if you're going to be doing desktop stuff, you know, productivity work or graphic design or some light video editing, you'll have no complaints here. And so one thing I wanted to mention was that I'm very impressed with the cooling that we get on here. There's some big vents on the side and just a single cooling fan inside for airflow. And it does warm up when you're pushing it, but the cooling works well. And the best part is that it's quiet. Even when it gets cooking, the fan is barely audible. Compared to the other mini PCs that I've looked at, this is actually super impressive. And with all that boring stuff out of the way, let's move on to the gaming. And I just gotta say, I love using Steam Big Picture mode on these little mini PCs. I usually set it to run by default and have a controller hooked up and ready to go. And to start off, I'm just going to show you some lower spec and indie games. I didn't bother showing the FPS because most of these games are locked at 60 FPS and they're not going to have performance issues anyway, especially on a powerful little mini PC like this. And I think lots of people would be totally happy just playing games like this on this kind of little mini gaming setup. But we're not here just for low spec and indie games, so let's see what we could make it do when we're going to push it. Starting off, as always, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We need to keep in mind that this is a mini PC. It's not going to be a gaming beast, so sacrifices obviously have to be made. For a game like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I would be playing this with a controller, using this mini PC like a game console, on the TV, sitting on the floor surrounded by stuffies. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we have the option to lock the FPS to half the refresh rate of the screen, which is what I would do. If I'm playing at like 45 FPS and I'm getting dips down to 30 FPS, I notice those dips and the game feels like it doesn't have great performance. But if I lock it at 30, then I don't notice the lower FPS nearly as much since it's consistent. It'll stay at 30 and run fine without any dips. So yeah, it feels more like a console experience, which is fine. That's actually the best way to use these mini PCs in my opinion. You just use them as a gaming console. Lock your FPS, play at lower settings depending on the game, use a controller, and you'll be able to enjoy a ton of great looking PC games without breaking the bank. That said, I'm not going to lock it at 30 FPS for any more of the tests today. That's how I would use this thing, but I want to give you the full picture. So here's some Doom Eternal. This is running at 1080p, low settings, and we get a very respectable 51 FPS on average. Actually, if I was playing like this, I'd probably use resolution scale to get that FPS up closer to 60 FPS. But even still, a 50-ish FPS is a solid Doom Eternal experience, and it looks great. You can see all the little details as you slice demons apart and feed them their own hearts. And here we have Skyrim Special Edition, 1080p with medium settings, and I got 42 FPS on average. This is an older game and it runs great on all sorts of hardware. While I don't mind playing on low settings in some games, I find with older games, I think going down to low often hurts the visuals a lot. This is back when low meant low. So you could probably get between like 50 and 60 FPS if you went down to low, but I don't see why you would. I played this game at less than 30 FPS on the Xbox 360, and I put in hundreds of hours into the game there. So 1080p, medium, 42 FPS, it still feels pretty luxurious to me in Skyrim, even after all these years. Let's go back to a modern title. Well, it's a bit of an older game, but it got a next-gen patch, and now it's just as demanding as any other modern game. This is The Witcher 3. 1080p with balanced FSR2, low settings, and I was getting about 44 FPS on average. I find this is one game that can get quite stuttery on lower end hardware, so it's nice to see that we're getting a solid FPS and it's still very smooth. I'd have no problem playing through the game like this. However, I should show you some combat because, well, my character build is a bomb build, so it's like a cluster bomb and it can really tank the FPS. So in combat with like 8 explosions going off at once, our average FPS went down to 37 FPS. But still, that's above 30 FPS, which means that I think this is going to be a fine experience on this mini PC playing with a controller. And now here's some God of War. Running at 1080p with balanced FSR, low settings, and we got 34 FPS on average. And again, the frame pacing is very consistent, as you can see by the 29 FPS 1% lows. This is an action-y game, but like I said, if you lock your FPS at 30 FPS, it'll feel a lot smoother because you won't be getting the frame time fluctuations that you get when you're trying to maximize the performance. I'd have no problem playing through the game like this if I had a mini PC like this one. But what about higher refresh rate esports style games, you ask? Well, I was just about to get to that. Look, here's CSGO. This is running at 1080p, low competitive settings, and I got 118 FPS on average. This would be fine on a 120Hz monitor, but if you had a 144Hz monitor, or even like a higher refresh rate than that, then you'd probably prefer to lower the resolution down to 900p or even 720p. But on a 60Hz monitor, you're gonna have no problem. And now for a little Cyberjunk 2077. This is the hardest game to run that I played today. We had to make sacrifices, obviously. 900p with balanced FSR and low settings, but I ended up getting 44 FPS on average. That's actually playable. Especially if you were to lock it down to 30 FPS, it would feel much smoother. This is a first-person game, an action game, so having smooth FPS is important, but it's also a game that relies a lot on the story. And the action doesn't need to be super crazy if you build up your character in a way that doesn't require you to have twitch reflexes and get 1,000 headshots a second. I think you can have a great time playing through this game on this mini PC with these settings, as long as you accept that you're going to be getting a lower fidelity graphical experience. And we gotta try some Red Dead 2. This is 1080p, balanced FSR with medium-ish settings, but high textures, 32 FPS on average. Here in Red Dead, I'd probably lower a few settings to get those 1% lows up closer to 30 FPS, and then lock it at 30 FPS. But even like this, it was great, and then the game still looks freaking awesome. Look how damn good this looks. It's incredible that we're getting performance like this on cheaper devices, but even still, I think paying under $300 for a mini PC that can run Red Dead 2 looking like this, and also be a full-fledged desktop PC, and also take up no more space on your desk than a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that is freaking awesome. And then we have Elden Ring. This game doesn't have FSR or any sort of upscaling, so I'm running at 1080p native with the lowest settings, except anti-aliasing and shadows are set to high, because the game has some really terrible looking shadow effects when those are on low. Even though they're demanding, it's a sacrifice that I'm willing to make because the game looks a lot better like this. So we ended up getting 31 FPS on average, and that's alright. It's an action game, but I don't feel like it's one of those games that really relies on milliseconds of reaction speed, so I'm fine with 30 FPS here. However, you could always go down to like 900p if you needed more FPS. This is how I would play it though. And finally, let's end with good old GTA 5. It's an older game, but we gotta keep testing it because it's still one of the most played games on Steam. People love this game. Maybe one of the reasons it's so popular is because it's so well optimized. This game will run on almost anything. Here I am at playing 1080p native with the lowest settings except for shadows. I turned on the AMD soft shadows, which are actually pretty demanding. I ended up with 57 FPS on average. I think in this game that runs so well, aiming for 60 FPS is a good idea. If you're not as much of a stickler for the shadows as I am, then you could get a higher FPS. It's a great experience playing GTA 5 on this mini PC though. The game looks great, it plays great like this. And you might be wondering why I didn't test any emulation, because shut up, that's why. It's my channel and I'll do what I want. And I've had like 5 emulation focused videos in a row, so I wanted to do just some good old-fashioned PC gaming approach today. But as a gaming PC, a mini gaming PC, I'm super happy with this thing, and at under $300 bucks, this is a freaking steal. It can play older and low-spec games, no problem. It's an indie gaming beast. It could do desktop stuff, and it can even handle AAA games if you're okay with lowering some settings. The company that makes it, Trigkey, they sent this to me to review, but this video isn't sponsored by them. I can say whatever the heck I want, and if I didn't like it, I wouldn't say that I did. I just know a good product at a good price when I see one. This is a good one. I'll include a link to this mini PC in the description below if you want to pick one up for yourself. And that brings us to the end. Did you know I have a Discord server full of fun and funny and helpful tech dweebs? Stop by and hang out sometime if you're into that sort of thing. There's a link below. And if you enjoyed this, you might want to check out this video about another mini PC that I liked. That was a fun one. There's a link on the screen and at the top of the description below. Go watch that right now because we're done here. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.